Yeah, I think that the time when my thinking on anti-Semitism changed the most in the last 5 years was actually 2021, not now, because 2021 we had a similar situation on a smaller scale to what we have now, which is Israel and Hamas fighting and violence against Jews outside Israel, hate crimes, attacks, both at protests, but also just on the street. A lot of people who present as Jewish, Orthodox Jews in Brooklyn, especially people in LA, restaurants in LA getting attacked by people who claim to be, pro-Palestinian activists. And the thing that changed my thinking the most was not the fighting in Israel and was not even those attacks, but it was how the reaction to those attacks from people who are most likely to stand up for minority groups who are being subjected to racism or prejudice was anything ranging from apathy to being willing to justify the violence or contextualize it in light of what was happening in Israel. And at that moment, everything changed for me in terms of how I saw myself as a Jew living in America. Because in 2018, when the Tree of Life massacre happened, that's when my pre-existing beliefs about being Jewish in America were basically confirmed, because I saw people of all backgrounds coming together to condemn the attack. There was no question that it was a terrible thing, to show support and love for the Jewish community that was affected and for Jews everywhere. And that was exactly what I thought would happen if something like that had ever happened in America. With 2021, when I saw that I saw that when I pointed out these attacks and these massacres and the silence surrounding them, I was met with more silence, or with people saying things like, well, things aren't as bad for you as they are for Palestinians, or maybe stop oppressing Palestinians, as if Jews collectively are engaged in that oppression, and therefore any violence that we're subjected to is some sort of comeuppance or some sort of resistance to that violence. And once I understood that logic, that attacks on Jews could be justified, then I saw that history had not really ended. America was not really an exception. And there was really nothing obvious that I could see to stop us from sliding toward the worst things that have happened to Jews in history. And that was a terrifying realization. And it made what happened last month not really any less terrifying, but less shocking than it would have been otherwise. Because this time, when the massacre happened in Israel, I knew what to expect in the West. And I maybe didn't quite appreciate the scale and the openness with which people at really prominent institutions would praise acts of terrorism and murder and abduction of minors and torture and all of these things. But I knew that the underlying logic was there, especially when it comes to Israel, violence against Israeli Jews. And so seeing that mixture of silence, justification, and even celebration of this violence, it wasn't completely out of the blue for me, but it still has been really shocking and troubling to see just how far the violence can go and people will still be on board. So the way that anti-Semitism always works is that a movement will equate Jews with power, and Jews with being the power behind the thing that the movement opposes. So if you're Catholic monarchs in Spain, Jews are the power behind sin and the devil in your community. If you're communists in late Tsarist Russia, Jews are the capitalist power behind the revolution that you're trying to have. If you are Nazis in Germany, then Jews are the racial contaminant power that's keeping Germany from fulfilling its role as the master race, or keeping the Aryans from doing that. So with today's international left, international anti-colonial, anti-imperialist left, Jews are the power of colonialism and apartheid and oppression of oppressed and colonized peoples around the world. And once you equate Jews with being the power behind the thing that you hate, the goal becomes to destroy that thing that you hate or defeat it by destroying Jews or destroying all Jews or targeting Jews or eliminating the source of the Jewish power. So Israel is a manifestation in this version of things of Jewish power and Jewish colonialism. And people who are opposed to colonialism in general and might talk a lot about indigenous rights in America or other places will focus on Israel as the thing that we have to dismantle first. And that really becomes the lightning rod for all of their energy. And this is an almost religious kind of feeling of casting the Jew, capital J, as the enemy, and focusing all our efforts toward not just destroying it, but also placing it outside the circle of humanity. So we're human, we're good, and this thing, which is Jewish, is anti-human, anti-good, and has to be destroyed. And this gives a really powerful feeling of moral superiority and moral clarity to the people who are engaging in it. It puts us on the right, us being the people who are against Jews, us on the right side of history, and those people, the Jews, are on the wrong side of history, and we have to fight them with everything we have. I don't know of any other nation where there's this much discourse around whether we deserve a state, whether we deserve self-determination, whether they already have a state or not. The question of, Jewish indigeneity in the land, to me, couldn't be clearer. Everything about our civilization, the language, the stories, the archaeology, the history, the genetics, point to a unique culture with a really strong connection to its homeland, that was maintained despite centuries of exile. No matter where we were exiled to, we kept those traditions in common, despite being colonized repeatedly, having our holiest sites built over by other civilizations. And this just speaks to the depth of the anti-Semitism, that people who are so committed to indigenous rights and anti-imperialism could be so opposed to what I would argue is the most successful decolonization and indigenous rights movement in modern history. That just speaks to sort of what we're up against. So it's very irrational. It's very religious. It gives people, in a negative sense, it gives people a really strong sense of purpose and identity at a time when other sources of purpose and identity are being disrupted. It gives people a strong sense of community. And this goes to what you were saying about, the facts being so clear. Like, how could people feel this way when, the massacres were videotaped and everything? And it's almost like a QAnonization of terrorism, where not only can we play online with the question of whether these massacres really happened or whether they're being presented the way that we were told. There's a lot of trutherism already, despite all the evidence that either this didn't really happen or Israel was actually behind it or it's being exaggerated. But also, there isn't just debate and discourse and playing with the facts. There's also debate and discourse and playing with the moral rules. So people get kind of a thrill online with coming up with reasons why maybe it actually is okay to abduct a 3-year-old. Maybe it actually is okay to burn families to death, because we have this new discourse of decolonization and how that should look and how it should be radical and how it should be violent and how it should be uncomfortable for the powerful. If all Israeli Jews are powerful colonizers, then they're, like I said, outside that circle of humanity, and the normal rules of how we should treat other human beings don't apply to them. This is how anti-Semitism has always worked, and why it leads to the logic of killing or expelling everyone who's Jewish. So that's how the anti-Semitism sort of functions here, in what I'm observing, especially in online discourse. As far as questions that we're grappling with, I think that the biggest question given this situation is where we as Jews should focus our energy and attention and how hard we should push. We could spend our whole lives trying to persuade people that their behavior and their words are anti-Semitic and trying to get them to be less anti-Semitic. And I don't really see any reason to think that that will work, and it will totally burn us out in the process. So I think that our energy is much better spent building Jewish community, focusing on our own Jewish identities, making being Jewish, worthwhile, and benefiting from the gifts that we've inherited from our ancestors. And then as far as talking to non-Jews and trying to make our case, I think it's much better to be proactive in educating people who are not in the grip of this dogma and this ideology, because this is a positive realization that I think comes out of this. There's a silent majority here who are just watching and seeing how folks who are engaging in anti-Semitism and anti-Israel discourse are behaving, and watching us as well. And they want to learn. People are actually very curious about this. People have a lot of thoughts that aren't maybe fully informed, but they have good intentions. And so I think that the role that we can play if we want to be advocates is talking to our friends, putting material out there like what I've been posting on social media, inviting people to sessions or calls or any kind of format where we can explain and tell our story. I think it's much more compelling to tell our story than it is to sort of try to lecture people about what they're doing wrong. And people will come to understand what's going on their own if we do that. But at the same time, we should be, it's very important, I think, to be clear about this historical phenomenon and know how deadly it is. And know that we can't just count on things to work out. And this, I think, is the premise behind Zionism itself. What the Zionists realized 100 years ago is that at the end of the day, you can't just reason with people and you can't just behave well. This is a historical force that will try to kill us. And so we need to take care of our own defense as well as trying to be productive and moral and contributing members of society and so forth. I think one of the biggest things that Jews can run into, and this is a very hard belief to undo, is the belief that if we change our behavior, people will feel differently about us. And this is not only a belief that all sorts of oppressed people can internalize, but it's also has deep roots in Judaism and Jewish religion. If you look at Eicha, which we read on Tisha B'Av, which recounts the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple by the Babylonians, the people that doesn't get mentioned at all across 5 chapters are the Babylonians. It's all about Jews and God and the things that, and this is throughout the Torah. What did the Jews do wrong? What did our kings do wrong? What did our leaders do wrong to make it so that our oppressors were able to oppress us? So we as a people, and this can be a great strength, are very focused on our own behavior and what we do wrong. But it's really important to understand that we're not the only players in this game, and we are not the source. Our behavior is not the source of the anti-Semitism. And coming to that realization can be very healing, because before you come to that realization, you try to make people who are abusing you stop abusing you by being better, by changing your behavior, and that won't work. In fact, I think it can increase the resentment. If someone's ideology tells them that Jews are the problem and they see us behaving really well, that can feed into the idea that we must be so clever and so sneaky and so deceptive that we're able to control the world and oppress and exploit people, even as we seem like model citizens or like we're doing the right thing. So I think that realization is something positive that can come out of this moment, because I think for the first time, the rules of the game and what's going on are so clearly displayed that we can no longer really talk around it. You have people now openly celebrating the most atrocious crimes committed against civilians that anyone can imagine in history. And so that means that people now have to make a choice, because we have such atrocities perpetrated against Jews, worse than anything in the past 75 years. People are now openly taking positions on whether they support that or not. And so for both Jews and non-Jews, the anti-Semitism is clearer to see than it's been in 75 years. I do think I'm seeing a lot of a renewal of Jewish consciousness and pride in light of what's happened in the last 2 months or so, where a lot of American Jews are, maybe for the first time, understanding the importance of a Jewish homeland, because they've seen Jews becoming less safe in Israel and America at the same time. Israel has been made to feel much less safe, and after this horrible surprise invasion, and our diasporic neighbors are turning on us right at the same time. And I can't think of a more revealing dynamic than that.